How can we find hope in the midst of hurting? How can we heal when difficult things happen in our lives? To help us talk about these things and to help us answer these questions, it's my honor to welcome to the show Dave Keehn. He wrote with his wife Debbie, so Dave and Debbie Keehn, this book right here, Living in the Shadow of Grief, Enlarging Your Capacity to Grieve with Hope. And he shares a little bit about his story, his testimony, some of the tragedies that have happened in his life. And he wants to help us walk through seasons of grief. So, Dave, thank you for your time. Thank you for talking with me today.
Thank you for this opportunity.
It's wonderful. I'm glad to have this talk. And as I'll do when I come across topics like this and I share with you, I'll explain why I do so. For those of you who have listened regularly, you know I'm an apologist. And apologetics often talks about the truth of our faith, the truth of the gospel and the Bible. And there are arguments and debates about God's existence and why we can trust the Bible and so on and so forth. And that matters. That's important. That is the role of an apologist. But also, and I was talking with Dave about this before we got started, also, as an apologist, I want to talk about what it means to flourish as humans, to talk about the goodness and the beauty of our faith as well. And that gets into relationships, that gets into Christian living. Hence, when we talk about grief and suffering, we want to know, what does the Bible have to say about healing, about reconciliation, about forgiveness? Because if we're going to live this life well, we're going to walk through these dark times. And so I'm glad to have Dave to help us do this. But enough of me rambling. Dave, can you tell our audience a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm a dad and a husband, follower of Jesus. Those are some of my bigger identities, but I'm also been a youth pastor for 30 years. But I've also done a lot of other things during that time. I was a teaching pastor as well for 9 years. And for the last 17, regardless of what I did in church ministry, I was a full-time professor and am a full-time professor at Biola University here in Los Angeles, California.
Yes, and for those of you who don't know, Biola has an incredible reputation in apologetics. They do other things for sure, but they also have some wonderful apologists there as well. So, Dave, I know I'm going to ask you about the book, and so then that gets into the story. So it kind of all comes together. But what led you to write this book as opposed to simply talk about some of the things that are inside of it?
Yeah. It's a book that I never wanted to write, never thought I would write. I don't think there's anybody that would volunteer to be part of a club where you have lost a child. Um, and so the process of deciding to write this book really was not expected or planned. It wasn't like we need to write our feelings down and share this. It really was as my wife and I we're about year two of grieving the sudden loss of our son. Our son Adam was 24 when he died suddenly of a brain aneurysm. He was a youth pastor. He was married. He had a child on the way. It was like the best of the best to the worst of the worst in a heartbeat of a moment. And so as we were about 2 years in, the rawness of grief has been have been ebbing away, but we still felt something was missing. So we could have a great day. You know, we could enjoy the beach or Disneyland or each other. We could go to worship at church, but it just felt in all of those moments we were still lacking something.
Hmm.
Couldn't name it. So I ended up just calling it the shadow. Like we were living in this shadow, like where you were impacted, for good or for bad, by this reality. And I happened to write just in my journal about it. And I was at a conference that I was hosting for one of the organizations I serve, and was talking with a publisher who knew our story. So I was talking to him more as a friend, not as a book pitch. And as I shared this journey and our feeling at this season of our life of just we're living in this shadow of grief, he just like lit up. Is like this, you need to share this, and I'm like, okay. And he asked, do you have anything written on this? I said, I have a journal entry. And from there, this book was born at that breakfast of just uh, someone desiring to hear more of our story, how it could come alongside and help other people who are not quite sure how to handle grief because uh, grieving the loss of a loved one doesn't fit the normal patterns of grieving bad diagnosis of your health. You know, most of us think of the cycle of grief as denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, and that works with bad news that you might receive but it doesn't work when you've lost a loved one because there's no bargaining with death. There's no coming back from that finality. And so we were having struggles kind of really understanding what were we experiencing and what should we experience next. And that's how we wrote this book is more like, when you first hear the news, how do you react? What do you need to think about? How do you kind of what will help you in those first gut wrenching, gut punch moments. And then we get into like responding. So you got that next season of life where you're trying to put some pieces together. And then the third stage, we actually called living with a broken heart because grieving never ends. When you love that person, there will always be an aspect of grieving that continues on. And we likened grief to a ball in a jar, that the ball of grief doesn't get smaller, it's the jar gets bigger. So that's where the subtitle, enlarging your capacity to grieve with hope came, that through the power of God and his spirit, that your life will increase in what you can actually handle and how you can then respond to tragedy. And then the last chapter is all about that. How do you live with hope? Because the truth is that grief and God coexist in the same place at the same time. It's not like grief pushes God out of the way. God is present in that moment, and therefore hope is what we have to hold on to.
Mm. There is so much there that we could branch off and talk about. And so I'm trying to figure out, all right, where do I want to go from here? Because you shared so much wisdom. If you don't mind, just real quick, you don't have to take forever on this, but could you tell us just a little bit about Adam?
Oh, I'd love to. I love talking about Adam. Yeah, Adam was kind of a miracle child for us. He was born and conceived in a time when my wife was sick, and so we've always never thought we could have Adam. We have an older daughter, who's 32, married with kids, and we ended up adopting a child. But Adam was that last biological child of ours, and just really special. I was a youth pastor, and so Adam grew up in my youth ministry, which meant that he was going to struggle to some degree with being a pastor's kid, and so he had his own kind of journey to God in high school, but his senior year of high school, he had a true coming to Jesus moment. Surrendered his life to Christ, decided to go to Bible University where I was teaching. I think partly because he could go there for free and it was close to the beach. But while he was there, he became so passionate for the gospel and really decided that God had called him to be a youth pastor. He did a summer internship at Mariners Church in Irvine after his freshman year. Came to me after that experience saying, "Dad, I think God's called me to be a youth pastor." I'm like, "Yeah, I don't know. You have to really make sure that's your calling and not just because I made it look so easy or good." But he was so passionate for the gospel. He joined their staff for middle school, and then his senior year of college, he was actually hired full time at a church in Glendora, California, to be their middle school pastor. He joined that team in that church in February of 2020, and the next month, COVID shut the world down. But because Adam was so passionate for the gospel, so innovative, his ministry actually continued to thrive and grow, and it was just seeing great things for God happening. I was just in awe, as a youth pastor myself, watching what he was doing in the most difficult season of ministry. And so he comes out of that. He got married soon after graduation, and he and his wife wanted to start a family soon, and so he was uh, basically looking forward to the birth of their daughter. And then in June of 2022, tragedy just gut punched us, and Adam died suddenly of a brain aneurysm. He was found unresponsive, and the coroner told us it was a massive brain bleed that nothing would have brought him back, even if the aneurysm was witnessed. And so that just turned everything upside down. You're looking at here's a young youth pastor, and you're just struggling with the reality that God allowed this to take place. And I think that that has been that the randomness and the suddenness of grief, I think, is so terrifying because it changes your life so drastically, so quickly. There's no preparation sometimes, and there was no one to blame. There wasn't like a drunk driver or Adam did something wrong. It was simply the reality that God created Adam in his image. God created Adam good, but that included this weak blood vessel in his brain, and so coming to terms with that was difficult, as a pastor, as a professor at Biola. I know the answers theologically, but now in the moment, where's the comfort? God, where are you? And uh, it was definitely a journey that took some time to have some deeper questions with God and allow God to really show me who He was and not how I had kind of put Him in boxes to just make life simple.
Yes, and I'm going to ask you the God question and the blame and the anger at God, the why God question. So we'll get there in just a bit. But before we get there, I want to ask you about your journey and your wife's journey through grief. Were y'all similar in how you handled and responded to things? Were y'all wildly different in how you were working through this? Well, compare your journey through this with hers.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question, and I think it's important to recognize each person is going to grieve differently. And my wife and I did, and the things that I was looking for and needing was not what she was looking for and needing. And in honest, I think that's where a lot of marriages, when they suffer the loss of a child, really destruct because they're just grieving so deeply and they feel so isolated because their spouse isn't grieving the same way. And so Debbie and I, from the very beginning, our spiritual muscle memory kicked in. And I talked to people about you need to like have a foundation that can withstand hardship. And what I mean by that is you have to know why you believe in God, not just because of it's what you've always known, but you have to kind of know this is the journey I've been on, and kind of going deeper in that. And so my point of that is spiritually we kept doing our same rhythms, right? We looked at scripture, and we were reading individually Psalms of Lament, and we were, I'm more of a person that I want people around me to talk it through, and my wife is more like I just want my best friend, and I just, and she and I would talk, and her and her best friend would talk, but I'm like, I think I need our small group. And she's like, I can't be around people. And so how do we navigate that? We went to counseling together. We went to counseling separately, different counselors and along the journey. And so all of that, I think, allowed each of us to have the space to say, I'm here for you when you need me. Grieve as you want to grieve, and we're going to come together as often as we have to and need to. But there really was a different journey of us, how we related to this moment. And because I think we gave each other that space, that also then gave us time to come back and share where we were going on our journey, which, like I said, led to us realizing like we're individually having similar feelings a couple of years, or like, by year two, and we're able to reconnect into a deeper way together.
Mm, mm, I like that. Okay. Okay. Um, Now let's go talk about the God question. Because you mentioned, all right, well, in this situation, there seems to be no one to blame. Someone might raise their hand and they say, well, you could blame God. You could get angry at him. God, why? He was so young. His future looks so promising, and there could be a rage or a bitterness. Uh, did you go that route? If you did, how did that? How have you worked through that? Did you not go that route? If so, why not? I'll just let you take it from there.
Definitely ask the why question. God, this doesn't make sense. You know, I don't think I went through like this raging at God, but I definitely went through questions of God, and how he would, how he operates. I told the church at the time I was that Adam passed. I was a teaching pastor at a church, and when I came back after a few months off of grieving, I came back to them, and I just confessed I had made it too easy to follow Jesus. Meaning, like I had explained the gospel as simply surrender your life to God, and it's all good. And the reality of to truly surrender yourself to God means so much more than we make it. It's a releasing of control. It's a submitting to what He has, and that was. I had done that, but I was living like God. I love you, and my life is for you. Just don't touch this part of my life. This part is off limits. And God touched the exact part that I thought was off limits, and it made me go through some deeper wondering of how God operates. And the foundation I had in my faith held. So Matthew chapter 7, the man who built his house on the rock, man, that was me, man. I still knew there was a God and I'm not it. I still knew Jesus was my Lord and Savior. And yet if that storm in Matthew 7 is so severe that it wiped out the houses built on sand, then the house that's on the rock, its foundation stood, but there has to be damage, right? There's windows blown out, there's roof damage, and I never had considered that before. And I think that's what happened to me is I was allowing myself to admit that the simple structures of faith that I had put together to have the right appearance as a professor and a pastor, those things got stripped away, and now I was forced to just say, okay, God, where are you in this moment? And in that journey, um, I realized that where scripture helps in many ways, there was no explanation for suffering when bad things happen to good people. Um, yes, theologically, we can say, well, sin entered the world and therefore death through sin. But the truth is that doesn't really comfort in the moment of grieving. But what does comfort is the reality that God is real, the reality of heaven, the reality that Jesus has the final say. And that's what I was able to walk through and understand. Like, there is no explanation of why. And so if I let myself just try to figure out why God, why, then I was running down a trail that there was going to be no answer that was sufficient on this side of heaven for me. But when I was able to instead ask, okay, God, where are you? God was able to reveal his power, his peace, his presence in ways that were sustaining, difficult. It took me a long time to sing certain worship songs about God's faithfulness, because I did feel like he failed me in that moment, but I know he hasn't, and I understand the fullness of what that song is trying to say. But the reality is, in the emotions of the moment, God, I need more, and God was showing me exactly where I what I really did need was different than what I thought. So it has been a journey, and I think that's the grace that we have to give each other is that people who are grieving are going to ask hard questions, and they're not necessarily looking for you to defend God and give the answer. They're simply asking the question. And when we come alongside them and say, man, I'm so sorry, I don't understand either, and we just leave it there, that's when we give the space now for God to step in and just to do his work his way. So
Man, this could be a 5 hour long conversation, but I know we don't have that. So I have a few more questions I want to get to. Um, I like what you said there, the questions we ask really determine where things can go from here. So you framed it as if you ask the why questions, this side of eternity, God doesn't always tell us the why, but you ask the question, God, where are you? Which is fascinating. I think very insightful. God, all right, I'm not going to know why, but where are you and what are you doing through this? I love that point because, I interview people a lot for my job. And so asking questions, it's very important. Uh, all right. There is a couple that comes to you for some type of counseling, and they have recently lost their child, and they simply ask, what now? What do we do? Or what do we not do? How do we walk through this? What might be some counseling advice or wisdom you'd have for someone going through something similar to what you went through?
I would tell them take all the time you need to kind of process what's going on within you, to be honest with each other. Um, this is where like resilience is something you build before the crisis happens, right? There is you're gonna put pieces back together, but the more resilience that you practice before this, the easier it gets. And so, Debbie and I still took walks at the beach, and a lot of those walks were in silence, and we were crying along the way, and at times we'd hold hands, and at times we didn't, and that was all okay. In other words, being together in the journey doesn't mean that we're lock in step doing exactly the same thing, but it means we're giving each other space, and we're saying, I'm committed to you. You're not alone in this, even though it feels like it at times. That's what it is. But make sure you give yourself space to grieve, and then be very careful who you allow into that inner circle. There's gonna be a lot of people that feel like they have to do something. There's something about being human, and especially if you're a Christ follower, like, I got to help, I got to do something, I want them to know I care. And the reality is, you're going to be bombarded with people who want your time. And the best thing that Debbie and I did is we had an inner circle of our daughter and our daughter-in-law and a few other friends, and then like everybody else in the next center circle became like warriors defending us from everybody's requests for time and help, or wanting to help. And so that inner circle, all we could do was grieve together. I mean, we were all so broken. We were holding each other up in prayer and talking and sharing for those months. The next circle of friends, they were just vigilant to say, Dave and Debbie are okay. If you need to let them know something, give it to us. We'll pass it on. And that became so important that we were protected from so many other people that want to help. And because they do, there's just something that they say, I want to help, but it's not the right time. And so having that outer circle that can then kind of guide, all right, here's the food that you're going to have to available for whenever you are hungry. Here's who's taking care of your house in this moment of time. And so that's what that next layer is really for. And their job is to protect you. And so I would say you got to have that, and then find a couple of really good counselors you trust. You know, you're gonna you're gonna need a counselor together, and it may not be the same person to do individual counseling with. It wasn't for Debbie and I. We found someone we met with together for a season, and then at the same time we had our own individual counselors who had a different perspective of just us as a person versus a couple, and that was also very helpful.
Hmm. Okay, I do appreciate that. And now you kind of guessed it, my next question, which is, all right, let's say the tragedy or the loss didn't happen to you, happened to a family member or a friend or a church member. Okay, in your experience, what are the do's and don'ts coming alongside someone going through loss? Things you say, things you don't say, things you do, things you don't do. What would your advice be for someone that wants to help, but they don't quite know what to do?
If you're not in that immediate inner circle, then you wait to be asked to contribute something. When you see that person, simply say, I'm so sorry. Don't try to make any other platitudes about heaven, or, rejoicing about, what God is doing in their, this person's experience now. Just simply, you see them, you say, I'm so sorry. Um, don't expect a reciprocal response. Don't expect to be hugged. I was the pastor at a church, and I literally wrote an email to our church before we came back. I said, if you see us and we're not standing during worship, just know that in our hearts we're connecting with God. And if you see us and you want to give us a hug, but we don't open our arms for a hug, we still care about you. We're just not able to. And I think that's where if you're walking alongside someone in grief, to let that other person who's grieving dictate what type of response you give. So start with, I'm so sorry, and then say nothing more. And then allow the person to indicate the next step. They may just say, thank you and move on. And so that's okay. They may say, man, it's been difficult. And so if they initiate, then sit there and listen. Don't try to answer. Don't try to equate. Yeah, I lost someone too. I know what you. No, just I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Just say that over and over, listening and say, man, I hurt hearing this. Just say those kind of things, and then wait to be asked. If you say, hey, whatever you need, then be prepared for to do that, because most people say that in the moment, and then a week or two later their lives go back to normal, and they forget, and then but it's not until months later that I actually have the need, and I'll come to you and say, hey, can you help me with this? And you're like, oh, I'm sorry, I don't have the time. Well, now you just really kind of made it worse, because you told me whenever I needed something to reach out. Well, I have the need now, but now you're telling me you don't have the time. So be very careful what you promise or what you offer. Um, and I would, so I would say, allow God to be God in the moment, and let God take the control. Don't feel like you need to defend God or explain what's going on. Just simply be present, and I think you'll be okay.
Be present. I like that. Be present. And what you said about allowing the person who's going through the grief to dictate the terms of what to do or what to do next. A lot of wisdom there. Towards the end of your book, again, titled Living in the Shadow of Grief, if you're watching this episode, you can see the cover. Towards the end, you talk about joy. You also talk about heaven. So, where do those things factor into your life now? Having joy in your life, um,
Yeah.
also looking forward to heaven, the new heavens and the new earth, the gospel promises. I'll kind of stop there and let you take it away. But where do those things factor in for you?
Yeah, the reality of heaven and what God has in store for us as far as of Him who've been forgiven, the resurrection, it's what changes everything. If I only thought this world was all that there is, I'd be in depression and hopeless. But the reality that there's something else that God has created for us to experience with Him, and it's more than just an eternal worship service, but it's described as a resurrected Eden. It's described as the city of God. So there's work, there's purpose, there's culture. We already know there's food at the feast, but there's all of this music and life. Man, it just gave me such a like, man, I can't wait to be there with my son again, because you could see through scripture that those who are in the present heaven knew what was going on to some degree here on earth, and they remembered the people that they had relationships with here on earth. And so I'm, it's not just going to be, faceless names up there, but it's going to be people that we know and we love, and that when you live as Jesus has the final say, then the things on this side of heaven, they you can mourn them, you could grieve them, but it's not the totality of these people. It's not the sum of everything. And so Adam's story is still continuing. It's just continuing in heaven. And that becomes such a hope that only Christianity offers. None of the other worldviews have that type of focus of how we're meant to live in light that this world is not all that there is. And how we gain heaven is completely what God has established for us. We have an assurance of what is to come. And so that became my foundation. That hope became my foundation. But the joy was really a spiritual discipline of gratitude that I developed. Paul says, and I think it's Colossians. I apologize, I don't know the exact verse, but he talks about be watchful and be thankful in all things, right? And that idea is that I'm meant to kind of be looking around with expectation, and therefore my wife and I started practicing prayers of gratitude when we were going through some really difficult, dark times. And so for us out here in Southern California, we see the monarch butterfly a lot. And so every time we saw any butterfly, we would just pause, mentally what we were doing. If we were driving the car, we still drove the car, but we would pause and just say a prayer of God, thank you for Adam. And we would name something that we remembered good about Adam. And then we would force ourselves to look around our lives and say, God, and thank you for, and we'd name something else that we could say, God, thank you for this gift. And what that practice of gratitude did is it showed us God is still present, God is still active, God is still doing things that that are wonderful around us, and it created light in the darkness, and that's where the joy became more and more of our experience. um and I think that's the idea of enlarging your capacity to grieve with hope, that through the power of the Holy Spirit, your life is able to do more. So, writing this book, starting the Adam Keehn Foundation, to kind of come alongside other brand new youth pastors to coach them up. Those are all expressions that are not necessarily replacing our grieving. It's actually our lives have increased because of the grief, and we're able to do these things through the power of the Holy Spirit.
Well said. I think back to that analogy you mentioned earlier in the conversation about how the grief, the size of the grief doesn't change, but the container and the jar around it continues to grow. And I think well said there. Y'all, I hope you'd consider buying this book. We just kind of scratch the surface of everything that's inside, living in the shadow of grief. And you might say, well, hey, Nate, maybe I haven't lost a child or something along those lines, and maybe I don't, but I have a question. If you are active involved in your local church, if you're part of a community, I promise you that there will be other people in your life or in your church that has gone through some of these things. And so if you want to serve them and love them well, you need to have resources. So regardless of whether or not this has happened to you or maybe just someone you know, I would consider definitely getting this book. Dave, before I let you go, real quick, if someone wants to learn more about you, the ministries that you've mentioned, or maybe they want to buy the book, where are some places that they might be able to go to?
Yeah, I mean, you can buy the book on Amazon. It's published through D6 Ministries, Randall House Publishing, but I mean, I buy most of my books on Amazon, and so you could go to Amazon and get the book. If you want to know more about me or other things about Adam, we started a foundation called the Adam Keehn Foundation. Keehn is spelled Keehn. And on there, you could contact us. You could read more about Adam's story, and you could actually apply for our coaching grants. Right now, we're coaching 19 youth pastors across the United States and Canada, and we're always taking applications to coach up more youth pastors. And so you can go to adamkeenfoundation.com, and that's how you could contact me.
Wonderful. Dave, thank you for your time.
My pleasure.
All right, y'all. Nate Williams, director of the Apologetics Resource Center. If you could like this video, share with friends, subscribe to the channel or the podcast, that would be a blessing to the ministry. But until next time, y'all take care and God bless.